Brian David Gilbert is dead, and I killed him. Well, not technically dead. He's stuck in a camcorder time loop or something, but frankly, if you don't think those are philosophically identical, then you need to read more Socrates. Either way, there's an Unraveled-sized hole in our hearts, and I'm here to fix that by rigorously overcommitting to an incredibly dumb topic and hopefully going insane in the process. If I'm going to do this, then I will need a lot of research into things that don't really matter, and frankly, what matters less than 14th century Bible fan fiction written by a Gemini? Gemini's the bad one? Star signs confuse me, guys. Anyway, come along with me, dear viewers, as I fill your hole with the accursed knowledge of whether this trip through hell would be fun in a car that your friend refuses to take to a mechanic, even though you're fairly sure the sounds it's making are only meant to come out of things that are made to explode. That's right. Would Dante's Inferno make a good road trip? There'll be music there. Probably. Before we get to the poem itself, I am going to need to set up some parameters because this is a very important, highly analytical piece of media, and it will be treated as such. The best way to figure out what parameters to set would be to get some friends together and road trip around Victoria, you know, taking notes instead of actually leaving the car and going to places. But there's a pandemic on. Victoria is the size of England, but has one notable city. Geelong can fucking fight me, and I need all the work shifts I can get so I can stop streaming off a half-exploded laptop. Twitch.tv/chaosandcabbages. On top of all of that, knowing what goes into a good road trip is something that may be genuinely helpful in my future, and that, if anything, is the opposite of what Unravelled's about, so I made some up. Number 1. I spy. You've gotta have interesting scenery. When all conversation breaks down, all that's left is car games, and nothing is more classic than I Spy. On the same note, nothing is more boring than a game of I Spy where all anyone is spying is synonyms for sex tornado. We'll get to that one later. Number 2. Rest stops. A good road trip has a lot of snacks, and by extension, a lot of drinks. I'm going to need a spot where I can feel safe and comfortable peeing. If the bathroom stalls are missing doors, I don't want to go in there. If there are demons everywhere constantly threatening to castrate me, I'm going to be a little nervous about the whole ordeal. Same situation. Number 3. Information. How interesting are the places we're going to, and more importantly, how easy is it to find how interesting those places are? Do the museums have tours? Do the information stalls have brochures? Are the Whales of the Damned informative, or at least harmonically complex? I need to leave each circle intellectually nourished and ready for the next long stint of inactivity. And number 4. How about road? Never underestimate the impact of a good road on your trip. Gravel may be fun for a while, but it is murder on most cars' suspension or gearbox or something. I'm not really a car person, but I imagine if you shove enough rocks into anything, it'll stop working eventually. Smooth road, smooth trip. And with that, that's all 4 criteria established. We can finally move on to the first section of our little road trip. Pre-hell. Before we go any further, I do need to mention one thing. The first line of this poem is Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. Apologies for the pronunciation. It roughly translates to when I had journeyed half my life's way, or half our life's way. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, it shows us something. This isn't just a road trip, it's a midlife crisis. We are taking an unwise step on the journey of self-discovery, while others may, I don't know, start a YouTube channel with almost no subscribers in the midst of a pandemic while dropping out of university and just kind of hoping it'll all work out. We're driving through hell. We start at the foot of Mount Purgatory, trying to climb up it to reach heaven itself. However, our way is blocked by a lion, a leopard, and a she-wolf, and frankly, I'm already seeing great potential for I Spy. We do, however, leave, trying to avoid being eaten. While we run like the cowards we are, we come across the poet Virgil, who's described as the fountain that freely pours, so rich a stream of speech. We simp for Virgil, and frankly, who wouldn't?
Come on, baby.
Virgil explains where we are and what's going on. He then actually offers to guide us through the circles of hell, which is a little like if a hot tour guide who worked in your hometown offered to guide you around for the entirety of your road trip. Who knows how qualified he actually is, but worst comes to worst, you've got some eye candy for the trip. On to the score for pre-hell. I'm going to be rating each of the parameters out of 5. A 5 is excellent, a 0 is abysmal, and a 3, well, that's about average. It is an Unraveled, so of course, we're using paper. I Spy. It's a 4 out of 5. The Mountain of Purgatory, the vicious wild animals, Virgil's beautiful face, who is all of our master and our author, are all incredible, but a true 5 out of 5 I Spy has endless detail to offer. Rest stops are a 1 out of 5 because you know what environment is really conducive to making you need to pee? Mortal Peril. Do you know what environment is terrible to have to stop to pee in? Mortal Peril. We're being chased by wild animals. We're safe eventually, which is why it's not a 0, but it's not good. Information is a 5 out of 5, baby. Look, we got Virgil's beautiful face just telling us everything we need to know at every possible moment. How can that be anything but a perfect score? And how is that road? 3 out of 5? Look, the road itself is fine. It could even be excellent, for all I care. However, depending on just how aggressively you drive, it's either full of those 3 wild animals or fresh roadkill. Either way, not great, but frankly, the fact that that's about average doesn't bode well for the rest of this video. Overall, 13 out of 20. That's fine. I'm sure it'll only get better though. I mean, we're going through hell. Now, the first circle has written instructions over the entryway. It's all very informative, going to be great for our information score. And it also really helps mentally prepare you for the hordes of souls being tortured by insects. The scenery here is a lot of naked people tied to crosses being stung and bit by horseflies and wasps as their blood mixes with their tears and drips onto writhing beds of worms, which sounds unappealing. Okay, you got a big river, Curran the ferryman, hordes of lamenting dead, scheduling issues, yada yada yada, basic hell shit. There's a large abyss of mist and then a forest full of people who were chill but never actually baptized, like Homer or Ovid. It's a little odd. It's kind of like if BTS self-insert fanfic had the main character meeting One Direction in hell, saying, "Love your work," and then moving on without addressing the fact that they're in hell. I Spy is 2 out of 5. Look, the insects are all great, but all it takes is one person who finds blood and tears mixing together to drip onto a mass of writhing pink tubes and the whole game's ruined. Rest stops are a 3 out of 5. At first, the only place to go is on one of those worm beds, where you have to just lock eyes with the lamenting souls as you're terrified that any exposed skin, especially that exposed skin, is going to be bit by the wasps and horseflies. So yeah, I'm holding that in. However, I do get the chance to just pee into an unknowable abyss full of mist, and that's good enough to bring it back up to average. Information is a 4 out of 5. I can't give every circle a 5 out of 5 for having Virgil, because then they'd all end up being 5 out of 5. So I'm going to have to nerf the information that he gives. However, we did have that arch, so it does push it back up to a 4. The road is a 4 out of 5. There's a whole pre-arranged ferry service, and the prose doesn't mention anything about potholes, but The scheduling issues I mentioned earlier were to do with the ferry, so it's pushed down from perfect. Alright, overall score is 13 out of 20, or equally as good as being chased by wild animals. Man, I'm so objective on this. Okay, before we even get to the second circle, we meet King Minos. If you aren't aware, his wife fucked a bull, birthed the Minotaur, and Minos then just threw Athenian children at it until eventually worst boy Theseus killed it. Which means that the man who fed children to his bull son is judging all of humanity on their morality. Bulls are herbivores! What?! Okay, now we get to that sex tornado I mentioned. I have two versions of this poem, the Mandelbaum and the Longfellow versions, and as far as I can tell, this isn't a tornado of people like having sex until they're raw and bleeding. It's just a tornado that molests people. Like a literal tornado, which is like bad. I wouldn't want to be in that, but it's an entire circle of hell. Like, I'm not sure what I expected after the Minos thing, but okay, Semiramis, Helen of Troy, and Cleopatra are all in here. Basically, if a dude's been horny for you throughout history, you're in the sex tornado. Sorry? I Spy, it's a 1 out of 5. Yes, there is a powerful wind full of horny strangers. And I guess you could try and like spy the people who are in that, but I don't know what Helen of Troy looked like. It's going to be a little bit difficult. Rest stops are a 0 out of 5. Why, you may ask? Well, there's no cover, so you're forced to pee into tornado strength winds. I can imagine what that's going to end up smelling like. I haven't been able to stop imagining it since I wrote this script. Send help! Information. That's a 1 out of 5. Why, you may pitifully whimper? Well, apparently Eternal Torment is stopped for long enough for famous people to tell you just a little bit of information, and Virgil's still there with us to tell us everything he needs to know, but I can't hear things when it's mildly windy outside. How the fuck am I going to hear things in tornado strength winds? That one is a pity point. The road is a 3 out of 5. There's no obstacles here, which is good. However, driving cars in tornadoes is reserved for the American brand of idiocy. For those of us with self-preservation, it's worth docking some points. God, ugh. So the second circle is sitting at a sizzling 5 out of 20. I'm using alliteration to hide just how bad that score is, which is frankly something more teachers should consider doing. In the third circle, it's been raining forever. Hail, grey water and snow pelt down on the putrid earth, covering the souls of the ever-famished. Astride this stinking circle stands the great beast Cerberus. That's right, this one's got a dog. A giant three-headed one that will try and eat you, but it's a dog. It's gonna be worth a lot of good boy points. I Spy, that's a 5 out of 5. Every round may be spying the dog, but unlike sex tornadoes, dogs don't get boring. Rest stops. Look, it's always hailing here. Leaving the car could give you a concussion unless you leave in one very notable spot. Underneath the dog. And frankly, if that isn't worth pulling this up from a 0 to a 3, I don't know what is. The information on the third circle is, I mean, there's a dude writhing in mud who'll tell you whatever you want to know. You got poetry babes running commentary, but like, do you give a shit? There's a dog. If you really want to know, I'd probably put it at like a 4 out of 5, but just pat the dog. The road cannot be saved by the dog. As I mentioned before, it's always raining, which means it's always muddy. As I also mentioned, it's always hailing, which means you'll always get a concussion if you leave the car. You're going to be bogged down constantly and terrified to leave the car. This road is bad enough to give you brain damage. 0 out of 5. God, okay. The presence of a dog has single-handedly raised this circle's score from a 6 to a 12 out of 20. It still would have done better than the sex tornado. At the start of the fourth circle of hell is this Greek god who's been retconned into a demon, you know, praising Satan and all that good stuff. Fun fact, that's never happened before in the history of Christianity. Immediately following this god turned demon is the Greek monster Charybdis. Charybdis is this incredible gaping maw, a toothed whirlpool who can crush any ship she pleases. Anyway, she's been turned into a demon, which is something that's never happened before in the history of Christianity. Anyway, there's two groups here, those who spent too frivolously in life and those who saved too much money and refused to give it to others. They just kind of push a rock back and forth for eternity. It's multiplayer Sisyphus. The I Spy is a 2 out of 5. Starts off great with Charybdis, but then it comes way down. Rest Ups are a 3, because there's places to pee, but there's nothing special about them. I guess you could do your business into Charybdis, but she's already been shit on enough. As for information, Virgil's the only one who's actually giving you any information here, and he spends the first half of the trip just yelling at that god in the completely unique situation, so 1 out of 5. The road, it's wet, full of teeth, but then it's fine. 2. Now the 5th circle is metal as hell. The swamp of Styx is spread out before us, wrathful souls quite literally tearing each other limb from limb. The water that should be blue or green or brown is this violent violet as the blood just drains into it and stains it permanently. The water is shallow, but the sullen souls beneath it cannot bring themselves to break their surface, content in their own sorrow. It's a wonderfully poignant point, if I'm honest. The wrathful ensure their own imprisonment by partaking in this vicious spectacle, tearing anyone who almost escapes down in an attempt to free themselves. The sullen and the sour trapped beneath the surface could never appreciate the little things in life, like the sun or the sky or the cool breeze on your face, and so are deprived of it in death. Personally, I would have prescribed therapy, but who am I to challenge God? That was a trick question. I'm the best person to challenge God. You know, I'm giving I Spy a 4 here. The actual scenery itself doesn't have the most detail, but you'd be surprised at what mileage you can get out of evisceration methods. Rest Ups, however, leaving the boat means you get torn in half. 0 out of 5. Information, some helpful sullen souls, Virgil's commentary, all very helpful, but it's a little difficult to hear over the unending screams. This road was wet and full of teeth. This one is wet and full of blood. However, there's a ferry service with no scheduling issues, which means that wet blood road stops becoming an obstacle and starts becoming a feature. 5 out of 5. Now that's all of the upper hells. There's 9 circles in total, that's 5 of them, plus some pre-hell. We're now moving on to what's called the sins of violence, and quick note, 1 through 5 are named as the sins of incontinence. Yeah, I'd make the obvious joke, but I think I can do a little better than what's dribbled out of the back end of my research. Besides, there's something way more important, guys. Virgil kissed us. Like, on the face, which is an odd choice, but I figure you gotta get all the premarital shit out in hell while God's not looking. The 6th circle has the city of Dis, which should be our first chance to really get out, stretch our legs, see the sights, walk around a city. Unfortunately, we aren't allowed in, so instead we have to sit in a field full of burning coffins while Virgil tries to sort everything out, and we get attacked by the 3 Furies and honest-to-God Medusa. These are all Greek monsters who have been retconned into demons, something that has never happened before in the history of... Anyway, eventually an angel comes down and threatens to manifest his destiny if we aren't allowed through, so we get to the city. Remember Medusa? If you play I Spy here, there is a more than 0 chance that you are going to be turned into stone. 0 out of 5. As for rest stops, the souls are all trapped in coffins, which means they can't see you take care of business, and there's a city that's for demons and tortured souls just aren't even allowed in. Which means there could be honest-to-God infrastructure and actual toilets. 5 out of 5. There's a lot of people to give you information here. However, they're all ones that Dante had personal problems with in life. Which means this is kind of the section of the fanfic where the author calls out their friend called Stacy for being a bitch, but you've never met either of these people, so you aren't sure about the context and who's actually in the right or in the wrong, or if they're both in the right or both in the wrong, and instead of a girl named Stacy, it's the Pope. Also, Virgil had to go leave to try and sort everything out, so he's not there for us, and this is just all around a 1 out of 5 on information. Now, there's infrastructure here, which means that canonically, we have an actual road. Presumably. I'm willing to give it a 5. The 7th circle has sub-rings to it, 3 of them. Just to save time, we're gonna do them rapid fire. First off, have you ever punched your neighbor or pretended the pizza that they ordered was yours? Then you're here. There's a river of boiling blood, a bunch of centaurs, and the Minotaur. The centaurs and the Minotaur are both Greek monsters who have been retconned into demons, something that has never happened before in their sub-ring 2. Self-harm and suicide mean that you get turned into thorn trees, which are ripped apart by harpies. Those are Greek. I'd make the I would have prescribed therapy joke again, but to be honest, self-harm and suicide are a bit too heavy to make the same kind of running joke out of. Just leave it at, if you're having those sorts of thoughts, just find something non-destructive to distract you for a while until you can actually get to someone who knows what they're talking about. Hopefully a therapist. For me, I find that shitposts and British panel shows are the good kind of fallback things. They make me feel good, they make me think about other things. Just good luck. Alright, back to being bombastic. 3. Recently at the cafe I work at, I had a particularly precarious pile of plates to carry. I stacked them all up, stood up in front of the table and said, alright, time to challenge God. In front of customers. True story. That's putting me here as to sodomy and other acts of violence against God. It's a desert that's raining fire. Basic shit. Now, I Spy is off the charts here. There's 3 different sub-circles to go through and admire and see so much detail in the scenery. I'd give it a 6 out of 5 if I could, but this is a very important, very objective measurement and will be treated as such. Rest stops, however, are a 1 out of 5. You're running from the Minotaur for the first circle, and for the third circle, if you get out of the car, you're risking 1st or 2nd degree burns. Now, you'd think the middle's the best time to stop, and it's just a lovely forest with occasional bird women flying at you and whatever. However, I don't think I could get over the mental idea of peeing on victims of self-harm, so it's a 1 out of 5. Information is also troubled in this. For the first circle, you're too busy running away to really focus on information. The second one is fine, and then you forget everything you learned in the second circle and everything you're being told in the third circle because you're just kind of focusing on Virgil and wondering if he's willing to take this particular punishment to seal the deal. This is either a great road or an utterly terrible one. The first sub-circle, you have to ford a blood river, but Chiron can do it in the original poem, so it's about horse height. The second circle is described as a wood which no path has left its mark, which means that it's 100% off-roading through a forest. The third sub-circle is sand driving. If you're the kind of person who owns a Jeep, you might mistake this one for heaven. If you're sane, you're going to be a little more concerned about what boiling blood, screaming sticks, and fire rain are going to do to your paint job. So it's either a 5 or a 0. Averages out to 2.5. I'm in the latter camp, so we'll round it down to 2. The 8th circle has sub-circles again. This time there's 10 of them, so it's rapid fire time again. First up, the second circle was meant to be for people who were horny in life. This first sub-circle is for people who made others horny. Pimps, panders, seducers. They're just kind of forced to march to another person's beat while being whipped for all of eternity, which, considering who's here, surely some of them enjoy it. Second circle, brown noses are pushed the rest of the way in. It's, if you're a flatterer in life, then you're buried in human shit in the afterlife. Good luck. 3, if you sold religious relics, then you are upside down in a hole with your feet being burned. Dante didn't have an idea for this punishment, so I don't have a joke. Right, sorcerers and diviners, what was it? Sorcerers and diviners are made into human pretzels and forced to cry until blind. What? What? Sorry, you half-ass every other punishment, one or two maybe like poetic or whatever, and then you give me that shit in the second last circle in just some fucking subcircle. That terrifies me the most. Out of any punishment here, I am genuinely scared of that one. The fuck? God, yeah, okay. Corrupt politicians are submerged in boiling pitch. See the third subcircle, it's... Ugh. Hypocrites wear clothes made out of lead, which, if you've seen Mythbusters, you know can be made into foil, so this hardly seems like a punishment. Fraud and thievery gets you chased around by reptiles for all of eternity, which is genuinely an experience I think I've seen advertised somewhere. Did a demon try and convince me to pay him to take me to hell? Like, I mean, you gotta respect the hustle at least. Fuck. Number 8, people who lie or generally give bad advice are consumed in pillars of fire for eternity, which seems a bit more on brand for the sorcerers, if I'm honest. If you were divisive in life, causing relationships to be split apart, then in death, you're just cut from chin to groin with your entrails going everywhere. Remember how the 5th circle was a well-constructed ironic punishment based on the ideas and emotions behind the actual sin? This is just taking it literally. And 10, the culmination of the penultimate circle of hell, is people who backdated documents and they're just given mosquito bites for eternity. It's genuinely, remember this boy, the first circle, the one that's meant to be like the least intense? That is worse than an actual sin. Why not? I Spy is another 5 out of 5. There's so much detail here. However, it might just end up being a roast session on whoever the fuck thought of most of these punishments. And as for the rest of them, this feels less like a visceral involvement in all of these punishments and more like zoo exhibits of different bits of hell. Like a first grader's diorama. What I'm saying is that these are all just average. 3 out of 5s across the board. And finally, the granddaddy of them all, the 9th circle, for betrayers and betrayers only. If you've ever faked someone out of a high five, then you're down here. Who you did that to will change exactly how you're frozen into the ice, but as a visitor you're less likely to be focused on the freezing method and more on the monolithic figure of Satan frozen into the center of this whole thing. A looming monstrosity that dwarfs even giants, twisted by scorn and his own tumultuous fall from heaven. His wings, once beautiful and befeathered, now lie twisted, leatherous, bat-like appendages. He has 3 faces, joined at the crown, one a deep crimson, as if the skin itself had been flayed from it, and one a yellowed white, as if a bone mask had been weathered against its will. In each of his mouths lie one of the great betrayers of history, Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, and then Cassius and Brutus, who both betrayed Julius Caesar. They are to be chewed in the mouths of the greatest betrayer of all, for the rest of eternity. Satan and Judas, if you weren't aware, are both biblical figures, and fun fact, the first biblical figures to appear in this entire poem. We're 30 chapters in. It's about the Christian afterlife. Also, Satan's 3rd face is just described as similar to those who come from whence the Nile falls, which I'm pretty sure means that Satan is canonically Egyptian. I'm not sure what to do with that information, but it seems like it'd be cool for I Spy. So sure. Like, don't get me wrong, the I Spy is good, but compared to the last 2 circles, it's a bit lackluster. So I'm going to have to give it a 4 out of 5. Rest stops. One of the punishments in this circle is to cry onto a block of ice until your face is frozen to it, which means that it is cold enough to freeze bodily fluids, and that's not at the coldest part of the circle, the center. Which means that by the time we get to the center, you might be able to have your pee freeze inside you if you leave the car. I don't know when it's safe. I'm not peeing. That's a 1 out of 5. Information, there's virtual, there's helpful people. You've heard the spiel. 3 out of 5. How that road? Well, it's cold, frigid even, and very icy, which means you will need chains on your car if you want any good amount of friction. And who hears, let's road trip through hell, and goes, yeah, I'll bring the chains, that'll really complement the fire and the brimstone? Well, you do. And I would, and Dante would have if there'd been cars in the 14th century, because we weren't planning on driving through hell. We were planning on going up a mountain, Mount Purgatory, and you'd bring chains for that. This was an incredibly roundabout way to reach 3 out of 5 for the road. And that's everything. All 9 circles of hell, even a little bit of pre-hell, all ranked in our highly objective scale. If we add up the overall scores, we get to 108 out of 200, or 54%. And I think that's more than enough for us to be able to tell whether or not driving through hell would make a good road trip. And the answer, of course, is no! I mean, for fuck's sake, we were going to drive up a mountain to heaven and then got chased into hell by wild animals only to be strung along by Virgil for 30 chapters straight. Half the places give you a concussion and the other half try to eat you. It's terrible! I am a cape and a wizard hat away from being turned into a human pretzel and then tortured for the rest of my life by being forced to cry until blind. Or death, it doesn't matter. Just, Jesus Christ, the poem's barely worth reading. The actual play sure as shit isn't worth going to. Just reject God, embrace Sonic. It's what PDG would want.